It's 5:14 a.m. I'm Mike.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Erin.
And tonight on the Sleepy Nerds podcast, we see if a million monkeys and a million typewriters can write a better story than Secret Empire.
Yeah. Are they Nazi monkeys?
Spoiler alert, they probably can.
Mike, best cartoon theme song, go.
Batman the Animated Series.
Erin.
X-Men 90s series.
Not bad.
Spider-Man.
Vanessa would say Sailor Moon if she was here. So.
Yeah. That's a good
Well,
one.
only if you like Fighting Evil by Moonlight. Making Love by Daylight? Was that the lyric? I'm
I
remembering
hope not.
that.
Who knows?
They were 14 and I
That
hope
show
it
is
wasn't.
really creepy.
Fighting evil by moonlight.
Yeah.
Fucking some dudes in daylight. This is super inappropriate. Hey guys, it's Japan.
It was Japan and it was the 90s.
All right, we're going to need an isolated clip of just that for our teaser.
I need that set to the animation.
She'll do it. Don't tempt her.
It was, preface, I love Sailor Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Going back and watching it, she is 14 in junior high and dating a 20-year-old. So
Yeah.
And she's dumb.
you were, well, yeah. It's really
Like
neither
Matthew
here nor there.
McConaughey in Dazed and Confused is Tuxedo Mask. So it's sort of like that Sailor Scouts, man. They keep getting older. They're the same age.
Because they keep dying and getting rebirthed as Japanese teenagers.
All right.
Anyway.
Sorry, Vanessa.
Well, I think we can keep all that in as the opening.
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone.
Totally unrelated to what we're talking about
Oh,
tonight.
yeah. Absolutely.
What are we talking about tonight?
What did we decide on? The official title was...
Jesus Christ.
I wrote...
Guys, today we're talking... That's really good as we record. What the fuck we're talking about?
What are we talking about? What's the title?
I know what we're talking about. I just
think
don't
we
remember what the official
It's
title we
You
settled
Nerd.
on was.
Sleepy Nerds University.
Okay, see, that's
Oh,
what
I thought we decided.
Sleepy Nerds U. I like You Nerd.
Yeah, it's You Nerd.
I like that.
Good, because that's what we're calling it. It's You Nerd, University of Nerd.
See, I didn't remember. I just wrote
That was your suggestion.
I'm
Mike.
sure it was. I'm just...
I had Nerd You. We said Sleepy Nerds You, and then you were like, no, it should be You Nerd. And we were like, oh. And apparently I was the only one who remembered that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really good idea, Mike.
Anyway.
Thanks. I'll take credit for something I don't remember doing.
So explain the topic, Mike. What are we doing?
So the whole premise was we were talking about how when Kyle and I were in college, we took a class about comic books. And so we wanted to create our own coursework based on something that we were passionate about, I guess.
Yeah, I think we've all felt like there's something that each one of us knows so well, we could probably teach it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, I was trying to think of ways to like make it interesting. Not like, oh, I could just talk about like, whatever for a little while. So I tried to make like, at least mine, I tried to think like tighten to like what an actual course would be.
Yeah.
I did that too, because I was always, my immediate go-to is like, well, I could teach a class on The Simpsons for sure. And I was like, I feel like that would just evolve into, it's like, what's our syllabus? Well, here's an episode list.
Yeah.
We're just going to sit in class and watch The Simpsons.
Yeah,
So I didn't
and
do
like, going back to the class we took, it wasn't just about comic books. It was about like social
It was
stature.
heroic. It was heroes in literature.
Yeah, so it wasn't
Yeah.
just like comic books. It was like comparing superheroes to like literary heroes.
Yeah, we did like Great Gatsby, Handmaid's Tale. Yeah.
Watchmen, and some other stuff. So like I was gonna, I could do a course
Fun
about.
Home. It was Fun Home we did.
Who knows?
Great Gatsby, Handmaid's Tale, and Watchmen would be a great like crossover TV event.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gatsby, Dr. Manhattan,
of
and a
Rorschach.
handmaid.
Yeah, Rorschach just kills
Everybody.
all the handmaids. It's just like, well, you're whores, so.
Hello.
Kyle, are you really going to make judgmental faces at me for that?
Would Rorschach and actually like kill like prostitutes?
No, he never killed women or children.
Yeah, he didn't
That
kill
is
children.
true.
It was
That is
all
true.
just sleazeball men.
Yeah, he would, I guess, kill all of the like men who had handmaidens then.
So the opposite
Yeah.
of what you just said.
I mean, he complains a
So-
lot about horrors, so you can see
Oh,
where
I
my
mean,
confusion.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we get that.
Because his mother was one. Literally. Why?
Anyway.
She was
I'm
a
bummed that you
literal
didn't say
whore.
like "hooah" like that. Like,
Whore.
Sorry.
it's okay.
I used all my New York accent earlier.
Way before that.
We were talking about your childhood.
yeah.
I
After,
about fucking pork roll or whatever the shit that was.
yeah.
That was New Jersey.
Yeah. It's close enough.
It's whatever.
Really?
No.
All right, who wants to go first?
You.
Yeah.
God damn it.
You were the one that remembered the title.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to deeply regret saying that.
Yeah.
My college
I
course.
deeply regret everything I say.
That's fair.
Go on.
I hope you were flashing back to your wedding vows at that moment
just,
that Mike
I
said
was
that.
just thinking, maybe I should say, with the exception of my wedding vows. But she knows, it's fine.
Everything other than I do, I regret. Mike Shiano, 2018.
Yeah,
Anyway.
You're not far off. Anyway, go on.
I could teach a class on fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It has really interesting reaches into history, into social society, I guess, anthropological views of it. I think it would be really interesting. I actually wrote a paper on fan fiction for a folklore class that I took, and looking at it from that perspective as a folkloric community was very interesting. I think historically that people think, Mike already looks bored. Looking at it from the perspective of people often think about fan fiction as sort of starting or taking off in the modern sense with the original Star Trek series. It's it was just middle-aged women posting about how Kirk and Spock were in love with each other, which they were, in fairness. But actually, going way further back, in Arthurian legend, the first text that had Mike, stop rolling your goddamn eyes at me.
Sorry, you brought up Arthurian legend.
In
and I just
Arthurian-
started watching Transformers.
In
Dark Knight the
Arthurian
Last Knight or
legend,
whatever.
there were not Transformers.
I also. Can we just talk about the 5th Transformers movie now?
No. So, in Arthurian legend, god damn it, guys, I'm going to get through this explanation.
Was Optimus Prime there?
No, but the entire
Is Rodimus
reason,
Prime.
that there's the story of Guinevere and Lancelot having a love affair is that this wife of a nobleman basically commissioned a fan fiction from Chrétien de Troyes and was just I really want to see Lancelot and Guinevere have this romance, so write that story for me. Because that was what you did at the time when you were a bored, wealthy woman. You're just someone write me something to be interesting and racy. And so, now that's sort of accepted as, when you think of Lancelot and Guinevere being oh, yeah, that's, just part of the story. But it wasn't for, hundreds of years.
The first headcanon.
Yeah.
Before cannons.
And then... Kyle, no.
Head catapults.
Kyle. So, I think it's interesting how it's very frowned upon and seen as a very frivolous thing nowadays, but I mean, given enough time, anything is just considered acceptable. And also then from a much, much, much more modern perspective, 50 Shades of Grey started out as a fan fiction for Twilight, which ugged both of those things. But I don't know. I think that's I think it's an interesting thing to explore is what's the point when something moves from being fan fiction or something that fans just believe about something versus when is it accepted as canon? And even to take it further, the people currently making Star Wars movies or Star Trek movies, if they ever make more of those, grew up as fans of those series as a kid, and now they're making them and they are canon. So where's that line?
I think it would all come down to when the owner of said property or whoever's in charge of the property at the time says, "Oh yeah, that's part of it. That's cool."
Yeah, well, and that's when there are owners of things Gene Roddenberry has been dead for a while,
Yeah.
and who really?
Well, but
I
I'm
mean,
sure
someone owned
yeah.
Star Trek as a property, but it is
Paramount,
yeah.
Well, I was listening to a podcast recently. It's an older podcast, but
How dare
sorry.
you?
Sorry.
Traitor.
Have you guys ever heard of the Metro video game series. It's like set like in Wasteland, Russia.
Yeah.
Like Metro
Yeah.
2033 or stuff like that. Well, they started as a book series, and the guy who wrote it, like it's this whole, like he wrote it about a specific character, but he created this whole big world, and apparently people would contact him and be like, hey, I have this really cool idea for this story set in this universe. He's like, yeah, go for it. I'll make it canon. Like, so I guess it would be all like up to when the creator says it's canon. Like that's what
Like,
happened with the Star Wars stuff. Like
that's
when
exactly what I was going to
transferred-
say. Like the expanded
Yeah.
universe, I don't know. I mean, did they have like any barriers on if someone wanted to write a Star Wars novel? I'm sure they had to do
There was-
something.
there's
but-
There's
Lucas
a Bible. There's a
Yeah.
like a Star Wars Bible. But I was just actually looking up the book series, like
Yeah.
what's in canon now. And there's a quote of George Lucas saying, like, that's not my Star Wars. He's like, there's my Star Wars and there's expanded universe.
Hashtag not my Star Wars.
Yeah. He's like, and they could do what they want within reason. He's like, knowing that, like, that was its own thing.
Yeah.
And that would most likely never cross over. And now that's like,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
all being picked apart for.
with
the new movies.
Yeah.
with the old expanded universe. I think he had the final stamp of approval on everything, like whether it was books or video games or cartoons or whatever. He had the final
Yeah,
say.
I'm sure he didn't like read
But-
everything though.
But like, yeah, like there was so much stuff.
And some bad stuff got in
I,
there.
I
like
think as
some
far as his
non-quality
creations, he
material.
probably like, okay, guys, Han Solo can't be like,
Yeah,
you know.
I think for like a lot of like
What?
the way out there.
I was just trying to think of like some like horrible thing Han Solo could do,
Yeah, like just murder
like have his own
villages.
solo movie.
Well, hey, it was good.
I mean, it was like
but-
I read a couple of Timothy Zahn's books when I was like in high school that were like about. It was a very long time ago. I'm trying to remember, but they were about like Leia and Luke at least. Han must have been in it, but I don't remember what he was up to. But it was like basically after the original trilogy and like what
Yeah.
they got up to. So
There
it was like
one
he
or
just do
two continuing books that continued from Return of the Jedi, like to way in the future,
There's
and
like
then
the Jedi Academy books,
yeah, and then there's like I don't remember
the Dark Empire.
Yeah, there was a lot, and then there was also like the Rogue Squadron books, which
Yeah.
also took place after Return of the Jedi, and Luke, like they appeared in it from time to time, but it was about like Wedge Antilles and like the pilots around like
There's
from
a
the rebellion.
awkward splinter of the mind's eye that was written before it was revealed that Luke and Leia were siblings.
Yeah, there's
That is
so yeah, but the thing was is George Lucas created all these different like companies to oversee everything. Like there was Lucas Books and Lucas Arts and Lucas, like Lucas this and
That's
this.
never a bad
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. But the thing was, is they
Well,
kept,
yeah,
like,
and-
they approved it as all as canon, and they had like an actual, like you said, the Bible and the timeline to show where the official timeline to show where everything fit, because it was all canon at the time,
right.
and then it was just gone.
Yeah.
And-
Well, so I think that's interesting to look at those kind of things is like, well, they were canon, but then they weren't. What are they now? And also, even at the
They're
time, like
legends
they were
now,
getting the stamp of approval, but like, again, not all of them were good. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there were people who were like, yeah, I'm going to completely disregard everything this person wrote.
Unlike fan fiction where everything's just like
well, it's just,
amazing.
It's just no. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like fan fiction in that regard. There's like some trash out there, and there's some like actual good writing out there. And
mean,
also,
it-
like I've seen like not novelizations, but novels that were about like comic book character, like
Yeah,
Batman,
I've seen those
Superman
before as
stuff,
well.
that are like, who's approving those? And to get into that, like, who decides? You know, comic books are clearly, I mean, like Marvel's a shit show right now, but you know, who's keeping track of that and like what's canon and what does that even mean anymore? So,
Comics are different because they usually have different lines for different stories. They usually have like their main series, and then if something doesn't fit in canon, they'll specifically say it. Be like,
Yeah.
hey, this is like a one-off that doesn't affect anything that's currently going on.
I feel like comic book canon is so weird. Like it's so loose. Whether it's like, hey guys, Thor isn't Thor right now,
Yeah.
and he has a gold arm. Everything else, just do what the fuck you want. But
Yeah. It's all over the place.
he's not. He's Odin's son, and he has a gold arm. As far as anything else, just do what the fuck you want.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting from a fan fiction perspective, like a big thing is, you know, oh, are these characters like in character, out of character? If I were writing, I've never written anything with, I don't think, with like superhero characters in it. So if I were like writing a fan fiction about Spider-Man, how would I even be able to go about saying like, oh, this is in character for him? Be like, well, this is in character for the cartoon, or like this is in character for like the current run, or anything like that. Or even when a comic comes out, like that Captain America is a Nazi one, where it is just like, okay, well, this goes against everything that the character is, and like fans reject it.
Well, I think it would all be at the writer's discretion then, like when they choose to set their piece. Because like you said,
Right.
if you're setting it in the universe of the old cartoon, then you'd have to go by his character then. But if you're setting it in the current comic run, you'd have to set it by douche Peter Parker.
So
I really don't like
you're gonna like just like hard left turn back into the actual like class. Like, what would a fan fiction writing class encompass? Like,
I don't think it would be about writing. I think it would be about an analysis.
analysis. Okay.
Phenomena.
Where do you
Yeah,
go
I was
kinda
thinking.
like-
I was like, final project. I think, or final paper would be to to write a paper on a fan fiction, like analyzing a fan fiction for a fandom that you're in. So just
Okay.
like pick any property that you're like invested in, find a fan fiction, and like analyze it in terms of, is this in character, out of character? What were they like achieving here? You know, there's a million roads you could go down.
I think
Like,
It'd
this is a
be-
coffee shop AU of
Yeah.
like the X-Men
it would be
characters.
really
What does that
interesting.
accomplish?
I wonder if there's anyone who has ever started reading fan fictions for property they like never had any interest in.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, okay, like Supernatural. I know that's probably like huge fan fiction wise.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's say someone has never ever seen an episode of Supernatural, but they really, really like Supernatural fan fiction, and then they like hate the show.
Yeah.
Like the show is completely out of character.
That
I'm sure that happens.
I'm sure
all
that,
the
like,
time.
has-
That's basically what, and I've never gotten into it, but the anime, like, I think it's Hetalia, where it's like all the
countries.
yeah,
are
the
people,
countries
yeah,
or
yeah,
people. That's what I hear about it, is like the anime itself is like not good,
Mm-hmm.
but just like what fans have done with it, like everyone's super into it, or they were. It's a little old now, but
My sister was really into it, so I'd like watch
Yeah.
some of it with her. It's like from like I was almost a history major, and it's a lot of like, oh, not a lot. There's like surface level history jokes,
yeah,
and then the rest of it's just like dicking around, but it's whatever.
yeah, that's kind of what you want. That's what I want anyway.
It was as good as like any anime, which is just to me just whatever anyway. But
Yeah, I think going back to what you said, I've definitely also gotten into things just because I've seen more fan art, but like also fan fiction of them in terms of like, I'd find a writer who I really liked, and it's like, oh well, they only wrote 2 things in a fandom I like, and like 87 things in something else I've never seen, so I'm gonna go watch that. Or like Voltron, I only started watching because I was just seeing fan art of it like everywhere, and I was like, okay, fine, I'm gonna check this out because I just keep seeing it, so like I need to know who these people are.
I think
And now I love it. It's awesome. Although last season,
the intersection of like
talk.
fans and actual content is interesting to you. I forget who it was. There was a Marvel artist that was assigned. I can't even remember which character it was now. It was like Rogue or someone, or like X-23 Wolverine, and they were assigned to write the character. So they're like, okay, well I haven't drawn this character before. Also, I'll see what her current costume is, and they just Googled the character, and the first result was someone's like Tumblr fan art,
Oh boy.
and they're like, okay, and they just drew that and it made it to the comic.
yeah.
And that person's like, hey, are you using my artwork in your official comic? Mm-hmm. So like that became, and it's like a really, really good outfit, and that's like their official costume now.
Oh,
Yeah.
was it recently posted?
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I just saw it. Hold on. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you've shown me the picture before, but I
Yeah.
can't remember.
But I've definitely seen like fan stuff where I'm like, I prefer that.
Because this one just came out.
Okay, that's what I
Sorry.
was thinking of with the final paper too. Like another thing in fan fiction is like fix, where it's like, yeah, this like horrible thing happened in canon, and I didn't like that, so you know, like everyone died, or like even this character I like died, or say like the finale of Legion season 2. They're like, so I'm gonna like write something that erases that or that redoes it, and so I think that's interesting. That sort of like fan interaction as like correction, or as like sort of like that art, like, hey, I have an idea for a way to do this that I think would be better, or that would be really good, and then like that sort of being absorbed.
Okay.
Let me see if I had anything else to bring up on. I mean, I had a lot.
No, it's interesting. I've read one fan fiction years and years when I first got the internet, and it was like a Dragon Ball like comedy fan fiction that was just like super fucked up.
Yeah,
Or it was like Master Roshi's turtles just like eating everyone.
Ugh.
Yeah.
that's not true. You read one of my fan fiction.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Erin, can we read your fan fiction?
Nope.
Oh, that needs to be a segment.
Mike.
Nope.
Erin Fanfic Theater.
No.
Mike and I will do a dramatic reading of your fan fiction from when you were like 14.
Oh, that's true. I was gonna say, like, you've read one of my more recent fan fiction. You also read the
That
fan
Sonic.
fiction I wrote when I was like
Was it the Sonic the
10 years
Hedgehog?
old. It was a Sonic the Hedgehog. It was the first thing
you-
I ever
And
wrote.
you know what? Of course it was Sonic the Hedgehog fan
Yeah,
fiction.
of course it was.
I feel Sonic the Hedgehog only exists in fan fiction at this point.
I mean, you're not wrong because games sure as hell are
I
good.
didn't even remember that I showed
The
you
old
that.
Sonic cartoon was like on Hulu, and I was watching it, and I'm like, this is so weird that he's not fucking anyone. Like,
Well, I would like to
watch
say,
out, Knuckles.
I would like to state I wrote that when I was 10 years old. No one was fucking anyone. I did not know what that meant. It was just like Sonic the Hedgehog. And I think I literally I was like, I wonder if that website I put on is still up. I brought it up on my phone and handed my phone to Kyle, so I didn't even reread it. I was like, I can't look at this.
I feel shame here.
I feel like it must have been like 4 sentences long and just like Sonic is cool. Shadow is cool. Here is my like made up character. She is cool too. The end.
Here's my OT. She's beautiful. Everyone loves her.
That would definitely be extra credit in my course. Like, if you can dig up anything that I wrote, I will give you extra credit
geez.
points out of shame if you show no one.
If you find a way to delete it, I'll give you an A. Because I
Yeah.
can't figure
Oh
it
man,
out.
did I talk about that? Have I talked about that college professor on the podcast? The guy that was on the TV shows. That was
No, I
like,
don't
Yeah, I think you talked about it in the last episode.
maybe. Yeah, he was like the guy
But-
that was
the acting credits, yeah.
patient with AIDS, pizza boy with AIDS. Mike, what's your class?
I really think like you
You might have
suggest.
talked about that in the one that didn't come out yet.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. But I think you said, I really think that was just some student that he pissed off, just found it and then fucked with it.
I will finish up before we move on with my reading list, my required reading for my class. There is a book called just Fic by Anne Jameson. Very good book. A lot of the things I just told you were from that book.
All right.
My Immortal, incredibly infamous fan fiction. Like, I feel like it's a rite of passage kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you have to, Harry Potter fan
A
fiction.
book came out about that.
Yeah.
A book came
and
out about the
the-
fan fiction.
Like it was like a really infamous fan fiction, and no one
Yeah.
knew who wrote it. And then some like woman came forward. She's like, "Well, I wrote it, and I wrote it because I was trying to find my like long lost brother." And there was like some tragic fucking story.
What?
And then it was like their publisher like canceled the book, and they're like, "That didn't happen."
No.
It was really weird.
I think the author of that has actually like written actual books since like is a published author now.
How did I miss
We'll
out
find
on
you.
this?
We'll find you some. I won't do a reading of my fan fiction, but I'll read you some My Immortal.
I'll do
and
read in Varen's fan fiction. Don't worry.
I
I know.
listen.
Just where to find it.
the
I don't
only
want to know the fan fiction. I just want to know the backstory now. Because
Oh, well, it's
that
just
sounds
like
more
the
interesting.
most, it's just the most like super crazy edgelord Harry Potter self-insert. She's like, her name is Ebony Dementia, like
Dark Claw,
darkness,
or something like
darkness
that.
with an apostrophe in the middle of it.
Wait, hold
Raven
on.
Way, and she's related to Gerard Way. And like Harry and Draco both fall in love with her.
Wait, hold on.
yeah.
Are you talking about the fanfic character or the actual person?
No, the main character in the fan fiction.
Oh,
This is
okay.
what the fan fiction is about. And so it's just like, I mean, I think it's a troll at this
the
point. Like,
fuck?
it's so bad that it's, it just doesn't
Wait.
make sense.
Wait.
Yeah.
If she were related to Gerard Way, how would she go to Hogwarts?
Mike, I'm going to stop you right there. You're trying to make sense of anything about this.
If she were related to Gerard Way, wouldn't she be American?
She gets hit by a Dementor, and she's like, "You're right." She's like, "I'm not okay."
Yeah.
She gets hit by a Dementor and just starts speaking with an English accent. And everybody assumes she's British now.
No, she's American, but she's just so special and talented that I mean that's
course she
80%
is.
of Harry Potter fan fiction is just like, yeah, I'm the first American to get into Hogwarts.
That's gonna be my fucking fan fiction. It's the annoying American like diversity student at Hogwarts.
like
It's
exchange.
like,
Hey, Harry.
you motherfucker!
Harry, where can I get a good slice of pizza? The fuck is this shit?
She's just like gotta have
Casting
some
spells here.
Wingardium Leviosa.
What the
Back
fuck?
ducky, you cocksucker.
The fuck is this broom shit? Give me a taxi.
Like, you know who's gonna win Quidditch this year? The Pats.
This fucking Hogwarts Express ain't nothing like the subway.
He just gets into a fight with a giant squid in his first week.
Just start shanking the Whopping Willow.
He just takes a fucking chainsaw to the Whopping Willow. Like one weekend, he's like, turned it into a fucking canoe. Teach you to whomp at me.
We'll never need firewood again.
I'm now going to write this fan fiction.
The Whomping Willow sleeps with the fishes.
Dear God, Mike, what's our class? We've traveled down a rabbit hole.
Sorry, Erin, finish your required reading. I need to compose myself.
I think that was it. Oh, the only other thing I had would just be comparing like excerpts of 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight with it in mind that it was a fan fiction, because like I read something talking about this recently, like the person was saying, I don't hate 50 Shades of Grey because it's, terribly written or anything. But I hate it because it's bad fan fiction. It's not even like the characters are nothing like Edward and Bella, who they originally were.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I keep hearing that it's fan fiction of Twilight, but how? There's no vampires. There's no werewolves.
I mean, yeah, it was basically
characters...
just a BDSM AU. But they're like, yeah, Edward is this. I don't know how 200-year-old virgin who like cries when he has to take Bella's virginity and then like gets turned into this, dom guy into BDSM who's a billionaire, and like it doesn't track at all.
Yeah,
but that's some fan fiction.
I guess. But like can you even call it fan fiction if it doesn't relate in any way to the source material?
Yeah.
How?
I mean, because it's the internet and you can do whatever you want.
Okay. Let me rephrase that. Should it be fair to call it fan fiction if it doesn't relate in any way to the original material?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think that's an interesting line to discuss. Is like, at what point are you just writing original fiction?
Yeah.
If you're changing, the characters and the universe that they're in, and arguably everything that makes them notable for themselves, like Edward is angsty and he's a vampire, and
I think that could really just be like on the syllabus for the class. Like you could do whatever you want.
Yeah.
All you have to do is say it's a fan fiction.
I would just be like, yeah, if you can justify it to me, then I'd be a very easygoing professor. If you can argue to me why this should exist as a fan fiction, then go for it.
All right.
I was reading something interesting the other day too about how like the concept of Mary Sue's is basically like escapism for young girls. It is just like we should stop hating on Mary Sue's as characters, because when you're, 10 or 11 or whatever, and you're just like, I just want to be in a like cool magical world and be perfect in every way, and that's just like my little self-insert. Like, yeah, sure. Then when other people have to read it, it sucks, but we all start there.
Okay. Done?
That's all. Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay. So mine is about clone trooper rights. I was going to talk about... I feel like I'd be the hippie professor. I'm talking about
Let's
this
have
subject.
class outside.
Yeah. But, it's like we were talking about earlier.
Pick up your books. Now close them.
Throw them in the trash. No, I could have, like we talked about earlier, like I could have just talked about Star Wars as a whole, but like I'm a big fan of like the clone troopers and stormtroopers, like because they're like the faceless characters in the movies, but in the expanded universe, the old expanded universe anyway, and even the newer one, they're actual like people, and that's something that you don't really get to see a lot. There were a couple episodes. The Clone Wars was like a good. What's the word I'm looking for? It was like a good. I can't think of the word, but like it showed them as people for like the first time.
Like a good exploration of their characters.
Like the only real time you saw the clone troopers in the prequels was like, and in the last 30 minutes maybe of an Attack of the Clones, and then the only clone trooper that you got a name for in Revenge of the Sith was Commander Cody, the one that ends up like betraying Obi-Wan. But like there's like 10-year gap between those two movies where all these battles are fought and the Jedis and the clones have bonded.
Clone troopers had names?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
That was the thing. Like they
if
had
they're all clones, wait, why did clone troopers get names? But
Hey, 9,000 people.
well, no, but why did clone troopers get names? But like modern stormtroopers, like Finn, got alphanumeric designations.
because it was a different. So
it was a different time.
it was.
It was after Empire when they'd like try to make them all more like faceless.
Well, also in the Empire, they weren't clones. There were some like clone regiments still, but they were all enlisted people in the Empire. But then the First Order was a different story. They started kidnapping kids.
Okay. I figured like the point of them being clones would just be like your clone number, like 6749A.
And that's the thing. They do have numbers, but they also have names. They picked their own names so they can identify better. It's easier to go and be like, hey, Rex, as opposed to, hey, CT 5562-B. Like,
But they all don't like the. Okay, I haven't watched any Clone Wars or
I'm
expanded stuff.
Dash D. Do you think all clone troopers look alike? Like, yeah.
yeah. And that's another thing, too, is they would pick their own names, but then a lot of the times is they would change their facial features. Like, they would have beards or they would have tattoos or
They
scars.
just cut up their faces.
They would.
Okay.
They would.
No lips. Jesus Christ.
They would shave their heads. Like,
Go on.
they would shave their heads. They would dye their hair. They would get face tattoos. They would do anything to stand out. And like, a lot of the times, the Jedi commanders would be like, "What's your name?" And if the clone gave their number, they'd be like, "No, what is your name?" Like, because there's a lot of instances where in the later seasons of the Clone Wars, when Jedi would refer to a clone as a number, the clones would be like, "My name is like,
Dick."
because it had gotten to the point, pretty much because it had gotten to the point where nobody was calling them by their numbers anymore. So like,
So does this factor into your clone rights movement?
yeah, like everybody, like now people just see them as like tools and expendable people, but they're not. They have feelings, man.
Oh my God.
That'd be like really interesting.
I was the racist.
Yeah. How does it feel?
I thought
that's really
implying that you're normally the racist.
no, that's really interesting from a sociological point of view, and just, you don't have like even like race relations and clones. Like I feel like some similarities between like find an identity.
Yeah.
and
Well,
everything.
like it going back to the Clone Wars is there are scenes on Coruscant where people would like just talk shit about the clones to their faces. They would treat them like garbage. The clones had their own like bar that like they weren't really treated anywhere else. Like they didn't get service, but like
I think it would be interesting to see what, if any, relationship there is between like clones and droids, because I know it's been posited that drones are basically slaves, have like no rights, and all the movies are just like bought and sold, even though they clearly have intelligence to some degree and like autonomy to some degree. And if there's this other big group of clones that's basically striking out and being like, "How dare you call me a number?"
I know why the caged gonk sings.
well, that was another reason.
Maya Angelou R2D2. No, not that one.
But that was another reason why the Jedi were more in favor of the clones, because the clones could act on their own if they had to, as opposed to like the droids who just kind of like they only followed their programming. Like they didn't have any like standard deviation.
But do they though? I mean, this is sort of a tangent. I feel like C-3PO tends to follow his programming.
Well,
R2 kind of goes off on his own. BB-8 definitely like he goes off and gets the.
I'm talking more about like the battle droids that were fighting.
Yeah.
Like they did not have any improvisational skills. Like if they were in a battle and like they had to climb a wall or die, they would just
They only had two modes. They had battle mode and inexplicable 1930s slapstick comedy mode.
yeah,
Wilhelm scream
Roger,
mode.
Roger.
yeah, pretty much. But like the clone could
Fucking
like,
hate them. Hate them.
Wow.
but like the clones.
You
could.
can't just say you hate droids, Kyle.
I hate those
Yes,
droids.
yes, you can.
They
It's
suck.
Erin, it's okay.
Wow.
Erin, it's okay. But yeah, the clones could think. Like there's in I wrote it down in my required reading. There's like a whole story arc where Anakin's like battalion is on this planet, and they're not fighting droids, they're fighting like the native people who are aligned with the droids or whatever. And Anakin has to leave, and they bring in this other Jedi commander. He's the one who would only refer to them by numbers. And he was like super strict, like, and he wanted his plans followed to the letter, but his plans involved like the clones marching headlong into like kill zones.
Good.
And they would just get wiped out. And it got to the point where the troopers were like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And they started taking measures into their own hands and doing better. But this guy was a dick and didn't like that.
There
We're
was
gonna
a
order 66 the shit out of you.
Well, it ended up being that he was a disciple of Count Dooku and they killed him anyway.
yeah.
But
There was I forget which Chinese dynasty it was, but there was an emperor who just put prisoners at the front of his army and had them run into battle and cut off their own heads in front of the enemy just to
Jeez.
like fuck with the enemy, because it was just like, well, like you have to do this. You're prisoners. We're either going to execute you here or you can like go and do that,
Yeah.
you know?
There's a guy like the very end of the line, and he's like, so you saw like them, like you're good, or you're good and spooked, right? Like,
Like, I don't need to go
it doesn't matter if I do.
I'll go back to my cell. Anyway, I was thinking of that comparison of just like, yeah, you have no rights. Just go into battle. Go be
Yeah.
cannon fodder, before we send the actual troops we care about in.
yeah, and that was that. But there's other like stories in the Clone Wars and another one of the old expanded universe books, the Republic Commando series, where like the clones actually end up having families with people. Like they develop these relationships with each other as brothers and with other people that they meet. So like they're not just like you said, cannon fodder. Like they're actual people. They have feelings. They have thoughts. They have
No.
feelings. Yeah.
Feelings and thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Shut up.
Thoughts, prayers, more thoughts.
If that doesn't do it, I don't know what will. What would your coursework be like on that? Would it just be, like a history class, just sort of studying the progression of
Yeah,
of
I would think maybe for like the final like interview, like a retired clone or maybe one that was like
Yeah.
like injured beyond repair, like limbs blown off or something like that. Like the ones that couldn't fight anymore or were done fighting, like get their side of the story and see what it was like for them, instead of like the official story.
in the current, like the timeline of the trilogy that's ongoing now, so like Force Awakens, Last Jedi. Is there like an official answer of what any remaining clones are doing? Have they all just integrated into society and like?
By the time of the new trilogy, there shouldn't really be any left.
Well, like they aren't making any. Did they all just sort of dissipate into society, like start
So-
families and?
So when the Clone Wars ended, they were the basis of the Imperial Army until they started recruiting people. But then, yeah, by that time they were phased out. And you see in Rebels, which was the cartoon that took place between the two trilogies, the prequel and the original. There's a couple of leftover clones from Clone Wars that are older by that time because they had the accelerated growth process.
Oh yeah.
So by the time Force Awakens comes
Wait.
around, they're all dead.
I literally never thought of this before. Did that accelerated growth not stop?
No.
Oh shit. I thought it was like they accelerated their growth up to the point where they were fighting age, and then
I
they
think-
would just age like normal.
I think once they hit fighting age, it slowed down.
Okay.
I think they altered it to a point where they matured faster, but then it slowed down. Because that was another thing in the...
So, movie pitch, remake in the Star Wars universe about a clone with accelerated healing, but it's just the movie Jack with Robin Williams. Anyone? Kyle, you're giving me such a disappointed look.
but that was
Do you
in...
know who directed that movie?
No.
Francis Ford Coppola.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie in a very, very long time.
I know.
But I'm going to remake it about a Star Wars clone. He's like, I'm going to go get my GED. And you just learn about, like, heart and love and... Did he, like, fall in love with the teacher in that movie? Was that a thing?
Yeah, but he was like 12.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that they touched on in the Republic Commando novels, is like one of the troopers fell in love with a Jedi Padawan. She was a little older.
With Robin Williams.
But
He's just so goofy.
So she was like
I get it.
20, but technically he was like 10. Like in like
Yeah.
age wise, but like he was matured like a normal person.
I thought you were going to say the opposite, like if a actually 10-year-old trooper fell in love with a Padawan who is also 10, but she looked 10 and he looked like 20 or something because of the accelerate. I mean, that would be awkward. I mean, it's both ways it's awkward. But
Yeah, and they touch on that a lot. They ended up actually having a child. Well, no, actually, that's not true.
Scandal.
She was pregnant and then
I take it back.
She was pregnant and then died in Order 66.
fucking-
So, you know.
Bummer. Way to bring us down, Mike.
Kyle, your turn.
Man,
Sorry.
I thought that was a downer.
You're really going to end on that? You're going to
No,
go out on
I
that,
mean-
Mike?
Maybe.
What's your recommended reading, Mike? What's your recommended?
Well,
You said that story arc.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote down there's several story arcs from the Clone Wars anyway, but I would do the Republic Commando book series because the Commandos are like the special forces, so that's a little bit more interesting. It's like it just focuses on this 4-man team as opposed to like whole battalions of like hundreds of troopers, so it's a little bit more focused. But from the Clone Wars cartoon, there's this arc about Domino Squad, which is about it starts out as 5 cadets, then they go on their first mission, and like 3 of them die.
Spoilers.
Sorry.
And the others get disenchanted. Start the first galactic pizza place. Domino Squad.
Oh, Kyle.
God damn.
Boo.
Anyway,
Why do my jokes get shitty looks? But
I gave him a shitty look. That was a bad joke. So
that.
the first episode is their training, like, and then passing their final evaluation to go into the army. And then their first mission, and like 3 of them die, and the other 2 go, on, and then they become what they call ARC troopers, which are like special forces. And then there's a single episode about this character named Cut, who he went AWOL, and he landed on this planet, and he met a woman, fell in love, and they had children, and he became a farmer. And then the main army like crash lands on the planet, and they find him, whatever, and they're gonna label him a deserter and bring him back for like a court martial. But the trooper that finds him is like, "You're happy? I'm just gonna go," because
You're a deserter, but you're okay with it. So.
well, because the thing is the droids come to attack, and he helps Cut defend his home and his family. And Cut makes a point to him, is like, "You see how happy I am? You could have this one day." And Rex is the guy who finds him. He's like, "Yeah, maybe, but my life's in the army." So he sees that he's happy, and he just kind of leaves him. Then there's the Umbaran campaign, which is the one I talked about with the evil Jedi. Then there's another solo episode about a commando who was in a fight. His squad gets killed, and he gets amnesia. And he's found on this planet by some like guy who runs a restaurant, and he takes him in, and
Pizza restaurant.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now that shit's okay.
Let me rephrase.
Fucking disrespectful.
Let me rephrase.
It was intended to be. So.
It's a cantina, but so he's found by the owner of the cantina, and the owner of the cantina just tells him like, "Yeah, you're a dishwasher. That's all you've ever been. You're not anything special."
He's like, "I'll show you."
And well, no, but that's all he thinks he is because he's got amnesia or whatever. And then again, the Republic comes to the planet, and they find him, and they're like, "Oh, hey." They were able to pull up his military record. It's like, "Hey, you're actually a badass." And he's like, "Oh, shit."
You washed so many dishes in the battalion.
And then the final arc, I would say, is this was from the season that never got released on TV. They only released it on Netflix.
Season 6.
Yeah. There's this trooper called Tup, and what they reveal is that all the clones have implant chips in their heads, and that's what activates when the Emperor gives Order 66. And his actually gets damaged in battle, and it kicks in early. And so the Republic's fighting the droids like normal, and he just blasts, like kills a Jedi, like shoots her in the back. And so they kind of like take him back to Camino to try to find out what went wrong with him. And that's like, that kind of kicks off like into episode 3. But the whole thing with that is there's another trooper who's trying to take care of him and make sure that he's taken care of. But everybody, like the Kaminoans and the Emperor, just want him like dissected to find out what went wrong. He's like, no, he's a guy. Like he's a person. You can't just like take him apart like a droid. So that kind of goes on.
That's all incredibly fascinating.
It's good. Like it's good. Like there's.
I will read your fan fiction on this podcast.
No.
It really, for me anyway, like some of the most human stuff from the Clone Wars stuff is involving the clones, not the Jedi or the Sith, because they're just like, they're more machines, I guess, than the clones are. Because like they're set in their ways, and they're just be like, okay, well, we have to wipe out the Sith and the bad guys, and like it's singular focus for them. And the clones in some case have that focus too, but they also like have other things to worry about. That's it.
All right. Well,
That was a better ending than the child dying.
Yeah, that was pretty.
You're welcome.
I say mine starts that way, so that'd been really weird.
I knew yours
That's
did. That's
good.
why I wanted to
Oh,
give you
really?
a segue.
It doesn't start with the kid dying.
Gonna keep segueing from.
So I think everyone knows I'm super into horror movies. I took a horror film class in college. It was American history and horror, and it kind of traced like popular historical moments in American history and like the horror movies that came out at the time, like Night of the Living Dead being inspired by Vietnam, like the Reagan era and Dawn of the Dead, a lot of that George Romero stuff.
I did not know that.
Yeah, all zombies are social commentary.
Even the Walking Dead ones?
No, that show sucks.
You're not wrong.
George Romero zombies are all social commentary. But I was always interested in, I think, like horror movies and like gender studies. Because one of the most famous tropes of a horror movie is the final girl.
The Virgin.
Usually.
Most of the time, yeah.
Which is, another interesting aspect of like the final girl is...
She doesn't have to be a virgin. She just has to be not a whore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I get into it. It's like there's this really weird like duality between the final girl being, or really horror movies in general, being like overtly sexist and very like male gaze centered. But then it's the same idea having this like strong female character as the final girl. But then it's also strange because you have this, you have like the rules of a horror movie, and like Scream kind of famously sets it up like don't have sex, don't do drugs, don't go anywhere alone. And those are the characters that die. And the final girls is kind of this like innocent, virginal, smart, reserved character until she starts behaving more traditionally like a man and starts being like violent and kicking ass.
Yeah.
And taking names.
And then she's fair game.
Yeah, and that's just her game. And like that was always really interesting to me, like that aspect of horror. There's this book I read for the class called Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And it was written by, I think her name's Carol J. Clover, and she actually coined the term final girl to talk about that. And there's just lots of these weird, like way more intricate than I can get to on a podcast, because we've already been going on for a while, and I don't want to like start peeling back the onion layer of the monster representing like overt aggressive male sexuality, and then this like girl representing like oppressed femininity. You know what I mean? Femininity. Jesus Christ. It's hit the time of the day where I can't pronounce most words.
Femininity. It's a difficult word.
It's interesting when you brought up that you're going to be talking about this kind of thing earlier. What I was thinking of is the first time, actually the only time, I saw Evil Dead. Like halfway through the movie, I turned to my friend who I was watching it with and was like, so this is all about how horrible it is to be a woman, right? Like this entire movie is about womanhood. And like a scene later, the like pipe started bleeding. And I was like, okay, yeah, so...
Yeah, I mean, Carol J. Clover makes that point, too, of, like, the male monster and the female monster and, like, what blood means to both of them. And, like, obviously, like, females, it's, like, a natural occurrence to, like, bleed.
Yeah.
In, like, like monthly periods, and also in, like, childbirth. And that's also presented as, like, the worst horrible thing ever to be, like, covered in blood and blood to be everywhere. And it's this, like, disgusting thing. And then movies being from a male gaze is like, that shit's gross.
Yeah.
But when this woman's like running away up the stairs and her top fucking flies off for no reason, like,
that's great.
That shit's hot.
Yeah, or when she like has a shower scene for no good reason, like.
But I mean, like, horror movies, I think especially, it's got like the golden age of slashers is like 1978 to 84, or like after the popularity of the first Halloween, and then you had like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, and every horror movie coming out was the same thing, really. It was a group of horny teenagers hanging out, they get murdered one by one, and then usually it's the final girl like defeats the monster, or at least for like a while she defeats the monster until like the monster pops back up at the end for one last scare.
Yeah.
But
I have a quick question before we get too far. How many times has Jamie Lee Curtis died in Halloween at this point?
Once.
And she's coming back for this reboot or sequel
The
or whatever the
new-
hell it is.
Someone put a really cool. I'll put it online when this episode goes on. There's like a Halloween Choose Your Own Adventure chart. The new Halloween movie ignores everything after the first movie. So it says Halloween happened, and then this movie's happened, and that's it.
So
Then there's another timeline that's Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and then Halloween 7,
which is
and then Halloween 8.
This new one coming out is 8.
No, this new one coming out it would be Halloween 11.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Because there's Halloween 1 and 2, which are Michael Myers, and they tell the story of him and Laurie Strode.
The other Halloween's not Michael Myers?
They are. Halloween 3 is not Michael Myers. Because the original idea for the Halloween franchise was every movie was going to be a different story that just took place on Halloween. But Michael Myers was so successful, they were like, no, we want him back for a sequel. So they did the sequel. Then they're like, okay, this new one will
now
start.
we'll do a different thing, yeah.
And people fucking hated it.
Yeah.
So
It's actually one of my favorite Halloween movies in the franchise, Halloween 3.
Who's the villain in that? Or the monster?
In Halloween 3.
Yeah.
It is Silver Shamrock Mask Company.
Spoilers!
Wait.
They make Halloween masks that
Wait.
children wear, but then they're like, enchant it with dark magic. And then people put them on Halloween, and this commercial airs on Halloween night, and it'll like melt all their heads. And there's also like robots.
Are we doing a no fucking way or like?
No, I'm not.
No, unfortunately, this is all real. I think to go back to because all I care about is, or what I care about most is meta narratives. Like, I feel like horror as a genre, horror movies are intrinsically like meta narratives. Even thinking about like the male gaze or the viewer at all. Like the viewer is almost always a character to some degree. Like they're shot. I mean, this sounds sort of redundant or like stating the obvious, but they're shot for the viewer. You know, there's so many like the set of rules. You know,
Halloween
everyone...
starts with a POV shot. Like,
I've never seen a Halloween movie. I know. Look, you've been friends with me this long, and I still haven't. So whose
Kyle.
fault is it really?
still yours.
Kyle.
I've told you to watch it.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Neither have I.
Jesus Christ.
Have
In
you?
my
You don't like
defense-
horror.
You're both
though, do
failing
you?
my class.
Not too much, no. In my defense, you did just say there were 11 movies with differing timelines.
Okay,
Right,
so
and
Where
also,
the
and
fuck would I start?
yeah, also
The first Halloween.
he's going to admit that like most of them aren't good, and even the things like the horror movies Kyle thinks are good are very dubious.
But you also just said that there's like 6 different timelines for
Yeah.
Halloween alone.
You could watch Halloween 1, 2.
Hold on, wait a minute, Mr. Star Wars. Are you going to get on your high horse about like timeline and Mr. Comic Books about timelines and like conflicting versions of things? I'm sorry, Kyle. Please continue.
It's okay. There's Halloween 1, 2, 7, and 8, which is all Laurie Strode, and she dies in the 8th one in like the very beginning. And then that's the story of Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode, finding out Michael Myers is her brother, and then that kind of strained relationship, obviously. And then he kills her in the 8th film, and then just like Busta Rhymes fights him.
What? Like not a character, but just Busta Rhymes. I hope.
Again, are we doing a no
And then
way? And nobody told me?
Halloween
No, I
3.
believe all of this.
Halloween 3 has Michael Myers isn't in it.
Right.
Halloween 4, 5, and 6. One of them Paul Rudd is in. It's one of his first movies, or his first movie, and that's the story of Laurie Strode's niece, I believe. And then you find out Michael Myers is like some demonic, enchanted magic person, and it's awful.
That's
And then there's the 2 Rob Zombie movies that were remakes, and then this new Halloween, which ignores all of that and is a direct sequel to the first Halloween.
so. But like, so if it's just gonna ignore everything, what's the point?
I mean, the point of
So-
any reboot.
Yeah.
Some people are making an argument like, so like that sucks that they're just ignoring everything else. But at this point, it's like, but it's so convoluted. The only good thing to do is just like burn all that, like very Kylo Ren,
Right.
like
Yeah.
kill your past. If
I
you
was gonna
have
say,
to.
sort of like we were saying with like comics and their storyline before. Even if you're going to set out and be like, okay, every movie, so all 10, you said this one will be 11. All 10 Halloween movies so far are canon. like, how would you even make a movie? Because they, like, conflict with each other. Like, one of them already ignores the other ones. Two of them are, like, remakes.
Yeah.
There's
And
no
the,
point
and the
there.
same thing
Right.
happens with Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. Like, there's so many different conflicting stories at this point within themselves. Like, how do you just start
Yeah.
from the beginning and
Well, yeah. How do you decide and who decides what's canon?
Yeah.
We're circling back.
so? All right, we'll let you. Sorry,
It's fine.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was very confused. So
No, it's okay. I think a lot of horror movies are very confusing, especially like the franchised horror films.
yeah,
Because it's one of those things where no one. I think now there's a very cynical idea of like, okay, every movie we make has to have the ability to launch a franchise.
Yeah.
And I think, even back then they were hoping franchises would be launched. But it's just like, especially ones like Nightmare on Elm Street, they just keep adding so much to the mythology. Like, oh, who's Freddy Krueger's mother? Who's his father? Oh, he has like a kid. Oh, there's this and that. And
You're
it just
blowing
gets,
my mind,
it gets to the
man.
point where like, at that time, they can't go back and like retcon the movies that came out.
Yeah.
But they're just like, and this happened too. And they just have to like keep adding to it. But I don't know, I just like the idea of, I think there's so many more, I think like you said, like horror being like meta narratives. There's so many more of like, a horror movie can just be a horror movie. I think in its like simplest form, and that's okay, and that's just entertainment. But I like horror movies that like, oh, this is a horror movie like about the Vietnam War, or like this is a horror movie about like the disintegration of a family, and that's what it's really about. And then like Hereditary just came out, and even if you removed all the horror elements from that, it's like you're still getting the full story of this family that has lost the ability to talk to each other, and now there's like all these horrible tragedies, and they don't have to deal with it. And instead of talking to each other, they just put each other down and put up walls. And in of itself, like that's horrifying. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
watching a family do that. But I don't know. I just like I said, like the class I took, any chance to, because I also think like horror movies are like one of the most disrespected genres for a long time. I think now they're getting to gain a little bit more like critical acclaim with stuff like
Yeah.
like the Babadook came out as like critically acclaimed, like Hereditary came out and like that's critically acclaimed. It follows it.
yeah. I think it kind of started with Paranormal Activity. Like
yeah.
it kind of pushed it more into like the. I don't want to say public domain because it's been like people have liked horror movies for a long time, but it's been like that was just so successful that maybe more and more people started to go, and it started to gain more of a following.
In like a certain, I think like there's certain movies every decade that like start a trend, and that first one's very good. 'Cause, even if you think of like found footage, like Blair Witch was really the first like, well, not even that wasn't even the first found footage movie. There's like horror movies. There's an '80s film called Man Bites Dog. That's a found footage fake documentary about a serial killer. It's a
Okay,
dark.
that's the one. No fucking way.
That was three.
Man Bites Dog is God, it's late '80s, I think, like Danish film, and it's this film crew, and they get invited to follow around a serial killer as he kind of like goes about, and he's like, oh well, he's like, yeah, I kill these people because like no one misses them. And like, oh, here, that's where I like killed this guy, and he was like doing concrete work, so I shoved him to the concrete, and now he's part of a building, and that's hilarious that people walk by this guy every day. And it's like a super dark comedy that's also kind of about like I think like Mindhunters, a Netflix show that just came out.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of about the same thing of like the media and the media's connection to like horrible people.
Mike is actually yawning.
Mag
now.
is actually yawning as I talk.
It is after 6 a.m.
It
though,
is.
so
It's not aimed at you. I
it's
swear.
aimed at what you're
But
talking about.
we did 38 minutes of fan fiction and 25 minutes of Star Wars. I have
Were you keeping track?
after the 30th minute.
Yeah.
I started.
Yeah.
I was like, this is gonna be a long episode, guys.
We have to
Sorry,
get an
babe.
entire semester's worth
That is
of
true.
material into one episode.
But no, it's about like there's several movies about this, and I'd say like most found footage is about like the media's relation to like horrible events and how implicit you become in that event once you like continue to film.
Yeah.
Like this film crew, and eventually it's like, hey, can you help me carry this body out? And I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
So like it's like, okay, well now you're an accomplice to a crime.
Yeah.
I think a lot of like found footage movies, and like, again in the meta narrative way, they make like the audience the accomplice to the crime.
I was gonna say, yeah, they like draw the parallel between the audience watching a horror film and like the audience basically watching, news at home. Like about these horrible things, being like, oh, that's horrible. Well, I'm gonna like go home, eat dinner, you know.
Yeah. But no, I like those deeper connections to make the horror, and I think one of my favorite ones and the ones I think have the most like to work with are those like gender connections to horror movies. Like even Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think is the most obvious one. It's this guy with this gigantic like phallic weapon chasing after scantily clad women in Texas. And then,
So like, what's the deeper meaning?
there is none. I'm lying. But then even that character, that's a character that could literally like change the face he's wearing. And by the fourth film, he's full on like wearing drag and wearing like a woman's face with makeup. And it's like, then you have his like identity.
So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one big like transgender coming out story
The fourth one.
as a franchise.
Holy shit.
The fourth one. And the fourth one is also Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger's first film.
What? Oh, their first. Okay.
Yeah.
You're blowing my mind, man.
It might not be Matthew McConaughey's, but I know it's Renee Zellweger's first movie is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation. Yeah.
Was Picard in it?
No.
Lost
Engage.
interest. I would pay to see the Borg fighting. What's his name? Leatherface.
Leatherface.
Yeah.
They haven't made a good Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie in a long time.
Yeah.
I could do an entire...
I think the only
I should do
one-
a stopwatch, even though I didn't stop watching it. A stopwatch about the second to last one they made. That was a direct sequel to the first one, and it was like
I think that's the only one I've seen. Was that the one that was released in 3D? And there's the one where there's the scene where he like throws the chainsaw at the camera. That's the
Yeah.
only one I've seen, but I didn't see it in
That
3D.
sucks.
I
So-
saw the TV cut at work.
And
That
that's
bums me out.
it's a direct sequel to
It's
the
a direct
original.
sequel,
To the
and then they
original?
show like the main character as a baby in like 1977.
Oh yeah, it was dumb.
And then they like cut forward, and it's like 2015, and she's like 12. It's like,
Yeah.
no, she's not 12 because she's like the appropriate age to like, completely sexualize a woman in American society is like 15.
So like, yeah, I was gonna say 14, 15. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll wrap up. I was kind of torn between when this is just like a slasher class, like doing recommendations of like my favorite slasher films and kind of like their importance, and then like horror movies like directed by women that I thought were really good. But I'll just do both because whatever. So slasher movies I think are real important. Like Halloween, I think obviously is like the slasher movie. And I think it gets a really bad rap too because people think slasher film, they're like, oh, like blood, gore, like boobs, and it's super understated.
now.
Yeah, now, and it's super understated.
Where's the bad rap part?
Yeah, and it's super understated, and it's like a legitimately creepy, well-made movie. That one, there's another one called Black Christmas by Bob Clark, the guy that directed Christmas Story and Porky's. He directed.
Is it a crossover between the two?
No, it's not.
Oh.
But Black Christmas also like. It's one of the only movies to this day that still creeps me out.
Crossover. Ralphie hunts zombies with a Red Ryder action BB gun.
Deal.
Go on.
Fucking zombies.
Is it about the Vietnam War still?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I had two 80s films I like called Maniac and the Prowler. Those are movies with zero subtext. It's just blood and gore. Maniac is one of my favorite slashers of all time for just like,
Kyle,
you turn your brain off and...
challenge accepted. I can find subtext in anything.
Okay.
I will watch those movies. I will not watch any Halloween movies, but I will watch those movies, and I will
I
find
remember
subtext.
I was allowed to watch like any movie I wanted as a kid except Maniac because Maniac is
This is the one you like the
VHS
most.
cover of the box is like a guy from the waist down holding a woman's bloody scalp with like a clear erection through his pants, and the taglines "I told you not to go out tonight."
Ugh.
You'd think that would be a good cautionary tale for a kid.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you were a young girl, you would have been allowed to see it. Like, this is why you don't go out at night. But as a young boy, it's just going to teach you to cut off heads
They
and get
remade the
erections.
movie with Elijah Wood,
What?
and it's a POV. The entire movie's from his point of view.
Wait, so is
What?
he in it or just
Yeah.
like his hands?
Elijah Wood's a gigantic horror movie fan. He owns a company that just produces horror movies.
I think you've
called
told us.
Spectre Vision.
I think you've told
Yeah.
us that before. But what's the point of having him in the movie if you don't see?
Because he'll like look and he sees himself in like mirrors and shit like
Oh,
that.
of course.
So
So it's kind of like Hardcore Henry before Hardcore
yeah,
Henry.
it's pretty good. The third Nightmare on Elm Street movie, Dream Warriors, which I prefer over the original Nightmare on Elm Street because that just delves into more of this like weird, crazy dream logic shit. And Freddy's like versing all these kids in this asylum.
Is that the one I saw that clip of where he's on a TV in like a
Yeah,
waiting
welcome
room?
to Primetime, bitch. Yeah. Yeah,
Is he
dude.
Scary Terry?
He is.
Basically.
Scary Terry's Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
I know that.
There's
is-
two, Scream, and then Behind the Mask. I recommend. Scream is what like revitalized the horror movie, like the slasher
I
for
love the Scream
for
franchise.
better or worse.
Yeah.
Because then you had all these like Scream clones that came out after that, like Valentine and Urban Legend. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Just cases of like diminishing returns. And then there's a movie called Behind the Mask, which is kind of like Man Bites Dog. It's a film crew following around a slasher, and he lives in a world where like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and Mike Myers all exist. And he's like, yeah, those are my heroes, and I want to be the next one. And this film crew is following him around as he's like stalking his final girl. And part of it's like documentary footage, and then the rest of it is like filmed like legit slasher. He's like, yeah, he's like, I went to the farmland beforehand, and I found this like axe, and I whittled down the head enough so someone could use it exactly one time, then the head will fly off. And I got this ladder, and I like filed down the rung so they'll climb up and fall down halfway through. And then it cuts to like the actual movie footage, and the guy's like, and he grabs the axe and it falls apart. He's like, shit, just like stuff like that.
So it's kind of like Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's pretty cool.
It's really
great.
neat. He's like, oh man, he's like that thing where a character sees me, then they run, they turn around, and I'm there. He's like, that's slashing is a lot of cardio. And he's just like working out the entire time. He's like, you have no idea how much it takes.
That's great. What's that called?
Behind the Mask. And it never got a sequel. It was really fucking good. And no one watched it when it came out, and now people want a sequel, and they're not making it. It sucks. It's so funny. But then, really quick for a wrap up, horror movies directed by women that I really like. American Psycho. A book that was like super railed against for being like misogynist.
That's a good movie.
A woman directed it. A woman wrote the script. Christian Bale starred in it. Christian Bale's mom was the head of that feminist organization.
What?
What's her name?
Mrs. Bale.
Yeah.
I just want to say, a woman directing things does not necessarily make it feminist.
I didn't say I did.
I know. That wasn't directed at you. That was just at...
Was it directed at me then?
Yes.
Well,
I mean, it was
fuck
more at our audience. I, like, hesitate to bring up Twilight again, but...
Please don't.
Like...
For the love of God.
I think, isn't it still, like, the highest grossing movie, like, directed by a woman?
I hope not.
I hope not, too,
Didn't Wonder
but...
Woman beat it?
Wonder Woman might have beaten it. Wait, that was a dirty look. I don't want it to be. I mean, I didn't, like, make that happen. Again, I don't like Twilight.
But anyway, Babadook, another great
Oh,
movie.
yeah. That was a good movie.
There's a director, Anna Lily Emapur, that directed the first, like, Middle Eastern vampire film. That's all done black and white. Elijah Wood actually produced that. Really good. And then Catherine Bigelow, James Cameron's ex-wife.
Huh.
She did Zero Dark 30. She did Hurt Locker.
Yeah.
But she did a really, really, really good vampire movie called Near Dark.
Is she the one who called him at the bottom of the Marianas Trench?
Maybe. I hope it was to divorce him. She's like, listen,
I do too.
where are you right now? We need to talk.
Good. Stay there.
Well, that
I'll
was,
send your stuff.
Do you know that story? Like, he was sitting at the bottom of the Marianas Trench and it's just like in this little diver thing, and it was just like, oh, it's like total, no one has ever been here before. It's just like silent and dark. And then he like gets a call like through his radio through the cable, and it's one of the people on the boat like, oh, like your wife is calling, and he was like, there's nowhere you can go that your wife cannot reach you. I hope it was. Now knowing that it was like he has this ex-wife, I hope that was her calling to divorce him. All right. Is that the end of your?
Yeah, that was it.
All right. So register online for any of these classes at... We don't have the resources to set up a website.
No, we don't.
A fake college registration website.
We'll set up our Patreon so that you can donate to us so you could join our classes and give us more money.
Yeah. More money. Any money.
So you can owe more money and learn nothing.
Ooh.
Welcome to America. Spend money, learn nothing.
Yeah. I think we just proved, especially looking at the running time of this episode, you can learn a lot. Not useful stuff, but a lot.
Nothing useful. All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Hey everyone, if you enjoy listening to the Sleepy Nerds podcast and want to hear more from us, you can follow us on Facebook at Sleepy Nerds Podcast, Instagram and Twitter at Sleepy Nerds Pod, and you can also subscribe to us on YouTube, Podbean, and iTunes.